Hi everyone, I'm Timothy von Rueden, better known as Von Art Online, and I am an independent artist based out of the lovely state of Wisconsin. And in today's tutorial, I'm going to be talking about the use of negative space and how to make an impact in your work. As an artist who grew up striving for realism, learning the impact and value of negative space within a piece helped break the confines of what I believed a work of art should be. When you are learning how to add values to create form, the idea of intentionally leaving areas blank and untouched just seems wrong. But with great art, I've learned that not everything has to follow a set rule or be rendered entirely realistic in a drawing. Especially when it comes to a traditional medium such as graphite, where there is no hue or saturation contrast to rely on for directing the viewer's eye, instead we have to rely on that value contrast. And too much negative space may leave the drawing lifeless or unintentionally sloppy in execution. So I'll go over some points on how negative spaces can add to your overall composition and leave a lasting impression on the viewer. There is power in letting an area be entirely blank to tell a narrative that would have otherwise been diminished if you just filled it in. It can be empowering and bold as an artist to let some areas of your work be left what maybe others would describe as unfinished, but I can assure you that with the correct use of negative space, your work could be much better off with their inclusions. So to start off this tip tutorial, what exactly is negative space? So essentially, negative space is an area that is left blank or seen as left unfinished, and it's with purpose, it's with intention. And often this is used to do one of a few things. It could create silhouette of shapes, it could add contrast, it could create a glow, or it could just be a very bold statement in a piece. So in this first example, you can see how we're creating more by drawing less. And sometimes you create more of an impact by what you don't draw than by what you do. Adding areas of negative space can directly alter the overall meaning and reception of your drawing. So I implore you to experiment with letting some areas be blank and see how the tone changes. And in this drawing, if I would have filled in the rest of the inside of the head, it would have left the overall feeling being less impactful, because having it be blank implies that there's mystery surrounding the image as a whole. And if you filled it in, that mystery could be lost. So personally, I like to leave negative spaces where I want to create visual intrigue, and that contrast will draw you right in. So the next use of negative space is probably the one you'll see most often, and this is the one where it constructs its own silhouette shape. So the use of negative space can create shapes and silhouettes based on the shading around it. As you can see here with this drawing, it creates the representation of a keyhole basically from the outline and shading around it, but you don't have to actually draw within the shape at all. And that shape then creates a powerful source of attention and point of interest. So by filling in the area around the shape, you give it form and a presence that can't be ignored. And you see this in a lot of pieces of work, where another good example would be if someone drew a person in, let's say, a night sky, and they had a negative space of wings that were coming out of their back. Now, obviously, that would be represented with negative space. And it's a great way to add a story element, and it creates that shape, which then implies there's something deeper going on in the image. The next use is definitely one of my favorites, and it's to create contrast. And normally when we think contrast, we think of light and dark. And although this is similar to that, it's the idea of contrast of detail and detail of areas of rest. So when you're placing areas of heavy detail next to an area of negative space, there is a visual contrast that is alluring to the eye. The simplicity of the negative space will draw attention and create an area of rest against this very noisy visual background. And you can see it in this drawing here, how all the attention is brought onto the character, and the background acts as a noisy detail visual, and the character then becomes your area of rest. So adding on to that idea of visual contrast, if you push it and draw it in the right way, you can also create the illusion of glow and illumination. That same lack of any value may create the perception that an area is glowing. And you can see in this example here how the face and the area in the neck appear to be glowing. So this can be further implied with a lighter shading on the outside of the form emitting from the negative space. It's a visual illusion that can add another layer of lighting and intrigue within your scene, and it's definitely something that I like to use a lot in my own work. So the final use of negative space that I'm going to go over is just to go bold. Not all use of negative space needs to create a shape or a glow in your drawing. Sometimes it's just a powerful impact that can be used to add narrative and possibly some mystery for the viewer to read into. Just because it doesn't make sense in a realism execution doesn't mean you shouldn't try it. And it kind of took me a while to not only understand that, but actually start executing that in my own drawings. So for the example, I'm using this drawing that I have been bringing to cons with me for years now, and it's always one that gets a few conversations going at every convention on the mystery behind it, and there's intrigue from people that will be asking questions about it and wondering, why did I leave the center of her forehead with this blank circle? And I do it for that reason alone. It draws people in, and there's this mystery that is alluring. And I like the conversation that usually is brought about it. So just because I'm a big fan of negative space, and I definitely encourage you to experiment with it, that doesn't mean every single drawing has to have a negative space or an impact because of it. I think sometimes the overuse of negative space can be cliche or become gimmicky. So you want to make sure that you're not using it for that intention, that it will add to the drawing that you're creating and hopefully add a little more intrigue than what was left before. So thanks so much for listening to this tip tutorial. I hope you learned a little bit more about the use of negative space, and thanks again for watching.